Well, there's a new effort to push back against the self-described Islamic State. After the Iraqi army inexplicably fled when Isil attacked Ramadi, there's now a call for volunteers. They're forming militias to take back Ramadi. And in Syria, reports of more barbaric killings. Having captured the ancient city of Palmyra, Isil is said to have executed at least 400 civilians. The Syrian forces no longer control any of the border crossings into Iraq. ISIL's reach even extends to California, where 2 men are charged of trying to join the terror group. Their arrest is seen as more evidence of the effectiveness of the terror group's recruiting efforts. Well, Howard Gambrill Clark is with the Stability Institute. And Howard, welcome, of course, to Arise Review. And we should mention that a few weeks ago, when others were saying ISIL was fading, well, of course, you were saying not so fast. And sadly, of course, you were correct.
Yeah, we've seen this before. Whenever ISIL gives up land, they take land. And so we've seen this week has really been an extremely eventful week for everyone in Iraq and Syria. As you mentioned, they've taken over a major town that has many antiquities. That's a historic town in Syria. They took over the last government border crossing between Syria and Iraq, so now they really control the border between Iraq and Syria. They're conducting attacks today and yesterday in the town of Haditha in western Iraq, which has a major dam. They've taken over Ramadi and they maintain control of the capital of Anbar, that's in Ramadi. And they're conducting attacks in areas like Husayba and Habaniya, or near Habaniya, where there's a major Iraqi military base.
You know, Howard, it seems it's just a blink of an eye here. It's a 180-degree turn. And of course, the Obama administration was talking Delta forces taking out ISIL's money man and taking his wife, saying that perhaps they have gathered some significant intelligence here. But what we're also talking about now in Ramadi, a couple of thousand Iraqi troops fled before just some 200 ISIL fighters. Why?
Well, I think the Secretary of Defense this morning really hit the nail on the head in one of his talks. And he was mentioning about the lack of will to fight. And I think that's endemic throughout the Iraqi military forces currently. I'm not saying that can't change, but there's only so much the U.S. can do as far as training in tactics, techniques, and procedures, as far as arming the Iraqis. But as far as having the will to fight, the Iraqi forces really have to have that themselves, have to engender that and show us that they have a will to fight.
Well, you know, Howard, perhaps, and we hope not, it might be a lost cause here, but I've got to ask you, what is it about these ISIL fighters? Why are they so relentless? Are they that well trained?
I think beyond there are some that are trained. There are some folks that work with ISIL that previously had been part of the Ba'athist Party, that previously had been part of the Revolutionary Guard that was protecting Saddam Hussein. So you do have some commanders and fighters that have a lot of military and martial savvy. But beyond that, I think it's really the spirit of taking the metaphorical engine of this insurgency, and that is that they're always on the attack. If they lose a little land somewhere, they're going to gain it somewhere else. They're able to switch their forces hundreds, if not thousands at a time in hours, across dozens or hundreds of miles of desert to be able to take over new territory. So wherever in Syria or in Iraq, wherever government forces look like they're fledgling or not doing so well, of course, ISIL will attack.
Real quickly, Howard, what about militias? Some say that they may be the answer. Some say perhaps not.
Yeah, well, there's the two types of militias. You got the Shia militias, who, as some say, can create sectarian divides. And then there's a lot of talk about arming the Sunnis and how to do that, whether or not to do that through the government, whether or not to do that directly. And of course, you have folks in the government and folks that are outside the government, formerly part of the Iraqi government in Baghdad, who say, of course, arming Sunni tribes will create more sectarianism, and ultimately those weapons may be turned on Baghdad in the long term. So there is some controversy to do that, although in my opinion, it's probably one of the only ways that the Sunnis can take back their own country, their own countryside in Anbar.
Howard, moving along to another story, it's what's believed to be ISIL's first attack in Saudi Arabia. The Sunni terror group attacked a Shiite mosque. Now, the bombing is believed to be in retaliation for Saudi Arabia's participation in the battle for Yemen. And Saudi jets are taking part in coalition airstrikes against the Houthi rebels, even as peace talks are about to begin in Switzerland. And there was tension this week as an Iranian ship entered Yemeni waters. But Iran agreed to send the ship to Djibouti so inspectors could be certain that it carried aid, not weapons. Now, Howard, for a while there, it looked like the Iranian ship could be the flashpoint for dramatically expanding the Yemen conflict. But so far, that's being avoided.
So far, yes. And I think this all reminds us of the international, the regional, not only the effects regionally, but the fact that really, and some analysts really see this, what's going on both in Yemen, what's going on in Iraq and Syria, as very much of power plays between Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations and Iran. What you had here was a ship that was going to a port directly in Yemen, apparently to give aid, but then was redirected so that the United Nations could unload all the aid. And apparently, of course, reports this morning say it was indeed aid on that ship, such as food, potable water, and medical supplies, is then being unloaded onto other ships to then go on to Yemen after everything's fully inspected. In the past few months, actually, there are reports from, for example, the Financial Times that suggests that Iran has actually successfully had cargo ships go to Yemen with unknown supplies. Perhaps there was aid. Perhaps they are supplying the Houthis, which Saudi Arabia is saying that's what Iran is doing.
All right. Well, Howard, it seems like it's an ongoing chess game now between the Shiite Iranians and Sunni rebels. But I guess the question here, there are peace talks being held. Do the peace talks hold any real hope, or is it just window dressing?
They can be. If the peace talks include regional powers, which is extraordinarily important, if they include the former President Salah, if they include President Hadi, who now is who's now in Saudi Arabia, and Salah's family, for example, if they include representatives of the Houthis, which actually the former President Salah was a Houthi himself, then we have a chance of creating some sort of political balance in Yemen. But it really has to be holistic. It has to be, really, we have to have all possible powers that have a stake in Yemen at the table. That's the only way we're going to get ahead.
Right. Howard, of course, a story that's interesting, the world right here. Not long ago, al-Qaeda was considered the world's greatest terror threat, but since the killing of Osama bin Laden, al-Qaeda has been overshadowed, of course, by Isil. However, bin Laden was back in the news this week, as many of you know, when the U.S. released some of the material seized during the raid on his compound. The question here, what does a treasure trove of captured literature and computer documents reveal, in your opinion, about bin Laden?
I think it reveals 5 things, 5 very key items that really tell us a lot, not only about al-Qaeda, but also about its splinter groups and former organizations that were part of al-Qaeda, such as Isil. It tells us, one, that they are very interested in American policy. They want to know what American reaction is going to be for any of their attacks or any of their operations. It also tells us that there is a mentality, although there are groups like Isil that ignore this new mentality, which is to not kill as many Muslim civilians, those that maybe had in the past been working with secular regimes, to have sort of a lighter approach. It also tells us that al-Qaeda, and no doubt Isil as well, was very much aware of the United States' ability to conduct surveillance, to conduct signals intelligence. This is well before all of these leaks in the last few years have come out about the NSA.
Right.
Well before all of that.
Howard, of course, we revealed, I was looking at some of the literature myself here, that, of course, he really wanted more mass attacks against killing Americans as opposed to smaller attacks. I guess he was at odds with some elements and factions of al-Qaeda. But the question here is, there's been comparisons to Osama bin Laden as a madman. Is he actually a madman, or was he really somebody just bent on the hatred of the West?
I don't know if he was a madman or a psychopath truly or not. Probably was, since he was behind a number of mass murders. Having said that, he was bent on major attacks, specifically against the United States of America. He wasn't really focused as much about gaining regional territory and going after what he would call the near enemy, but going after the far enemy, sort of what he considered the root of all evil, the root behind, or the systemic sort of a root of what is giving money, for example, to places like Israel and Saudi Arabia, and that is, again, the United States. And we see this even with some ISIL fighters, and some ISIL commanders will continue this message that it's most important to conduct attacks against the United States as opposed to conducting attacks locally. So you see this narrative continue, even if it's not in the highest, even if it's not discussions amongst the highest leadership of former al-Qaeda branches, but you see this narrative continue to play out.
Howard, this interesting tidbit here. With Muammar Gaddafi, we found out about his fascination with Condoleezza Rice and the like. Here, we find a book on one of his shelves, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, a mystic occult encyclopedic study here. Apparently, he had some fascination, I guess, with the occult and some other interesting things.
Well, it could be. There's the other possibility that he wanted to understand specifically within Islam, to understand other religions, other belief systems, how you're going to convert people. I think that probably was the focus. Of course, I could be wrong on that. He also may just have had some intellectual curiosity. I think it's important to remember that Osama bin Laden, when he was crowned as head of al-Qaeda, he very much was the money man, was a front man. He himself was not considered to be a prayer leader or a religious leader, the same way that Zawahiri's #2 and sometimes is #3 at one time al-Libi was.
Well, I'll tell you, a quick trip of current events around the Mideast with Howard Gambrill Clark. Howard, thank you so much.
Thank you.